tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
All my life, I've wondered how to get a standing ovation, and apparently it's to walk on stage with Premier Higgs. So thank you for letting me bask in that. And thank you to everyone for being here this morning. I love the format of the fireside chat, mainly because it's Ottawa, and you need to be by the side of a fire to survive for 9 of the 12 months of the year. But also, we get the chance, especially in front of an audience like this, to delve into some of the issues that I don't think you get on your average CBC panel. And that doesn't mean we're going to give you a totally easy ride on this Premier, but I do want to give you the chance to talk about issues that I know matter to people in this room and those watching from beyond. And normally you try to warm up to the controversial stuff, but I feel like you can take the controversial stuff because you've been quite a leader on this issue. So let's start with transgender issues and parental rights. Because let's start there and then we'll see how it goes. Because this is an issue that we understand why other premiers have taken actions they've taken in the last few months on this. In a lot of cases, it was because you had, and they had their own supporters pushing them to do very similar things. You were the first one. So let me just ask you, when you put that policy forward that required parental consent for gender changes, for re-identifications at school, why did you go there?
Well, thank you for the question, Andrew. I guess the point was that we, throughout this whole duration of being in politics, I came at a time when I already had a career. And I wanted to bring a lot of ideas that I learned and decision processes I learned, but also on the foundational principle that you do what's right and the rest will fall in place. Now that doesn't always work in politics, it seems, but nevertheless, that's the philosophy we live by. And through this whole discussion, it became a policy that kind of got into our educational system without a whole lot of discussion or detailed discussion with our caucus. And after the election of 2020, and then a little while after, I started asking questions about it in detail. And then when I read the paragraph that basically caused teachers to hide information from parents, and to do so as part of the request of the policy, this just wasn't right. This isn't the foundation of families that we build on. And it was interesting, my wife and I talked about this and prior to making it an issue. And by the way, we've been married 46 years this summer, and four daughters, 5 grandchildren. We're very close to our family, and the idea that we would hide information, we thought, how would we like that if that happened? So then we started bringing it as a question, and then we saw some of the curriculum that was being taught on a parent or school day, a school teacher's day. And you'd say, or professional development day is what it's called. Anyway, you'd see, wow, where's the curriculum here that involves math and science and literacy and numeracy? Where's that in all this? So the challenge was, how do you have the debate on a sensitive issue, recognizing the reality of it all, but finding a path to do it? And I think that we have walked away from too many controversial issues, and that is why we've seen kind of an erosion of what we might have always considered standard. It becomes normalized, and it's not because it's normal, it's different. And we are a society that absolutely recognizes and supports all of our differences. But let's not exclude family as part of that process.
It was an issue that, for someone like me who doesn't follow New Brunswick politics explicitly, and I'd say probably has done so a little bit more thanks to you and stuff you've been doing there, it was not something that was really accurately defined by the media, what you did. I think before
That's
I read
unusual,
the actual...
isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, as we heard from the last panel, it's okay. They should have just been reading The Line and other outlets like that. But you were doing something that was a relatively moderate proposal, and even a lot of people that are in the parental rights space that have been advocating for something similar were saying, well, it's a compromise, he's not going far enough, it's a good start. But you were, to the activists that were against you, it was as though you had gone so far, you had done something so radical, you had done something so far right, is the term. I mean, did you ever imagine that you would be labeled as far right when you were elected as premier, going back to 2013? And why is this issue one that has been maligned in that way?
Well, just recently I was asked about a case of the far right, and isn't it amazing that in today's world, far right is having parents involved with their kids? Yeah. Isn't that amazing? So I say that tells you how far the spectrum has actually moved and how we need to find a path forward. But in analyzing kind of what we wanted to bring forward is let's address this. And then looking abroad, looking what's going on in Europe, particularly what's going on in Europe, about how they manage real issues around gender dysphoria, but how they look at it as, getting the right process for treatment and through psychologists, psychiatrists to understand, okay, how do we manage this? Because it in some cases it's very real. But in other cases, it's a process of kids growing up, and that's where parents are that one continuum in their life. And so we just say, okay, we want parents to be involved. And no, I didn't imagine it would be such a controversial issue because it seems like such a basic, fundamental principle that we all cherish.
One of the things that I find interesting, though, is that there are a lot of issues that tend to be within the domain of what we would call social conservatives. And these issues tend to get treated as political third rails. You can't talk about this, you can't talk about that. This is an issue that I think is very much in line with where a lot of social conservatives wanted to take society, but it seems to have a broader appeal. I mean, the number of folks that I've spoken to that have supported what you've done in New Brunswick or what Premier Danielle Smith has done in Alberta that would not identify as pro-life, would not identify as anti-gay marriage, but on this issue, they're there. What do you make of that? I mean, how has there been a coalition that does seem to be very large, not just within the conservative movement, but even within society itself, behind some of these policies?
I think the risk we're facing in Canada and the risk that we see in the U.S. is we've drifted so far from what people look at as common sense and how to manage the next steps. And we've drifted ideologically so far that all of a sudden people kind of say, whoa, this has to be addressed. So I think what we're seeing is, okay, here's something that's so basic, so fundamental, and yet it's an issue. But it will cause us, I think, to all be part of the solution. And when I think that we put teachers in a position to not be truthful with the child's parents, why aren't teachers speaking up and saying, we need to be part of this? And when we talk about, okay, this can be irreparable surgeries that could happen to young children, why aren't doctors speaking up and saying, okay, we believe we need to manage this, this is how it needs to be done? I refer to the European model now that Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the UK have all changed their policies to look at a different way to deal with the problem. Always recognize there's a problem and always recognizing there's a way to protect every individual in their beliefs and how we manage through that. But not just ignoring the reality of what makes sense and what's real. So I think that's the purpose for me is that we need to find the moderate approach here, and sometimes the definition, because you saw what happened in New Brunswick. So we are a progressive conservative party, but people jump on one side or the other wholeheartedly without trying to find the balance in the middle, and that's what we're trying to find. And sometimes it creates a bit of a firestorm. My wife will often say when I come home at night, "What fire did you start today?" And she said, "I was reading the news." I said, "That's your first problem. You shouldn't do that."
As long as it's true north, we'll forgive her.
All right, fair enough. There's one, Nate. Good for you.
Let me ask you, before we get on to that definitional problem, which I think is tremendously important, did you anticipate that you were starting something that would become a pretty national wave? And I'm curious if you had other conversations with premiers on either way that say, hey, thank you for breaking the seal on this so we can, or what the hell are you doing? Do you realize what my caucus expects me to do now?
Well, yes, we certainly have talked amongst colleagues, and certainly, I had discussions with many, and many have different views, and that's what we are in Canada. But I certainly look at what Saskatchewan is doing and what Danielle Smith is doing in Alberta, and I guess I'd like to think that at the end of the day, we'll find a solution that doesn't seem to be far right. It just seems to be really right. And I mean by that, it's such a correct path forward. And so in those discussions, and did I think it would turn into a national thing? No, that wasn't discussion. When my wife and I talked about this, and I said, this is going to be the week, we're going to talk about this. We both realized this could be the issue that either continues us in government or takes us out. But we were both prepared to say, fair enough. And I think there lies the whole challenge that we have as a society, as politicians, as members of any profession, which I just stated with healthcare and with education, is to say, I will do what I believe is correct. I will voice my opinion in a very respectful, mannerful way to improve what I believe needs to be improved. And it doesn't have to be protests and blowing horns and jumping on the street, but it has very adult discussions that say, I'm not afraid to talk about it.
Let's talk about that progressive conservative name, because that's always been to many people an inherent contradiction. And you have some people in the conservative family in this country that say, no, I'm a proud progressive conservative, and that means something very specific to them. You have others that just sort of tolerate it because that's the name of the party. And we also don't have in Canada the harmonization of the federal and provincial right-leaning parties, which is why you have this patchwork from BC, where you now have two warring parties that are going for right-of-center votes, and you have in Alberta a complete unique situation there. I'm curious how that, I was just trying to gloss over that, but I heard a laugh, that was apparently a laugh line for someone from Alberta, but I'm curious about your perspective on that in New Brunswick, because you're a progressive conservative premier, and I think that a lot of people would say that you are putting forward very ironclad, small c conservative principles with no need for a qualifier there. But how does that affect your navigation of that coalition that you have in New Brunswick, and also how New Brunswick fits into the Canadian conservative family?
Well, it adds a kind of a new dimension of I won't say confusion, but certainly an irony there that exists with the progressive conservative, because some people will grab a hold of the progressive piece, and some people will grab a hold of the conservative piece, and then you have to kind of bridge that within caucus. And as you know, back last June, I didn't bridge that very successfully, because I had 6 members of caucus that basically stood against the government and voted against the government. So it does bring an issue, but I think at the same time it's how do you have the discussions? How do you, and coming from a business world, and I know people say, well, you know, sometimes you just move along too fast. I'll have a lot of meetings, a lot of debate, a lot of discussions, and there comes a point in time where you just got to get on with it. And so we got on with it last June after numerous meetings in caucus and such. But there were 6 individuals, maybe 8, that were not happy with that, and it causes angst. So you can see the political upheaval that kind of creates. And we were joking here of coming in talking about, because I did in a state of the province, I did people didn't know if I was going to run again, and I put a song at the end of it, an old Clash song that said, should I stay or should I go? And kind of danced off the stage. But this time, when we did the state of the province, there's a lot of great things to talk about in the province, and I was thinking my song should be the Elton John one, that I'm Still Standing, because but I was recommended against that. But
well, Premier Higgs is leading karaoke in the Shore Club downstairs at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. But I'll ask you on that, Premier, when you mention those 6 members that left your caucus, do you view that as being, if I can just use a blunt word, a failure of your leadership to keep your party together? Or do you believe that the coalition was too broad and those people really didn't belong in your party in the first place?
No, it's a challenge that probably if my interest was how do I survive the next election, then I probably would have found a different way to try to manage through it, but I wouldn't have had the same result. And that, I think, is what happens to many of us, is we get watered down in our own beliefs because we're trying to appease the masses. We had diverse opinions, but that goes 2 ways. It goes 2 ways that, okay, if I have 80% of caucus that are on side and want to move forward, and I have 20% that don't, it's rare if ever you get a consensus within caucus of unanimity. Just doesn't happen, or extremely rare. So the point that, okay, we have the majority of caucus, we're ready to move on this. And the Minister of Education, he and I, we're ready to move. We presented, we've talked. It was time. So, yeah, we could have talked about it a lot longer, but I didn't see an end in sight. It was going to be, we were never going to convince some. All the while we had full support of, as I say, 80% of the caucus.
But let me extend that thought to its logical conclusion here, because if it sounds like, I'm going to do one of those, it sounds like you're saying things that like Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson, but I'm going to try to actually represent what you're saying, or at least as I understand it, that there's a risk for conservative parties of trying to be too many things to too many people. and that this big tent, which is often viewed as a feature of the conservative movement, actually carries its own cohesion challenges.
Oh, it does. Absolutely does. And what you're seeing is, we see the Liberal Party. If you want to talk about far left, how far can you get? And this isn't a political...
Don't challenge them.
This
They'll
isn't
find
a political...
a way.
This is not a political discussion, though, is it? I agree. But the idea, and you see, to your point you raised earlier, that's where the spectrum is going, and everybody is taking, oh, well, I'm way over here on the left side. And I think that is our job as conservatives, to find the way to have the detailed discussions and the frank discussions. And I'm saying that, and what I'm excited about, and he'll be here a little later, Pierre Poilievre, what I've seen from the rallies he's had in New Brunswick and the people that are showing up, we went to a rally, the average age was probably 35,000, 1,200 people. I think that's just wonderful to see young people coming into our party and getting involved.
Since you mentioned Pierre Poilievre, who will be here at 11:30 and not right now, as some people were disappointed to see me on stage, but he has been touring the country on his, it started as the Axe the Tax rally, and now it's the Spike the Hike rally, and I think there's going to be another rhyme next week. But the galvanizing issue for the federal Conservatives right now has been opposing the carbon tax, and this has been an issue in certainly in your province as well. We've seen provinces sue the federal government. We've seen the Supreme Court side against provinces on this. And then I think for the most part, the federal government's carbon tax was pretty safe until they decided that, Atlantic Canadians with home heating oil needed a bit of a carve out, and then it sort of undermined their whole premise here. And I'm curious for you, first off, how much of an issue is that electorally speaking, as you gear up for an election for people in New Brunswick, this carbon tax, but also, how do you anticipate this going when you have a federal government that right now doesn't even want to meet with premiers on this issue, which is, Justin Trudeau loves talking, and he loves people having to hear him talk, but this is like one opportunity to sit down that he doesn't want to take, because he doesn't want to hear what the premiers like you have to tell him.
Well, it's disappointing, but you get used to it. So sometimes you don't bother, but we are bothering. So there was a question asked that, if other provinces have a solution, then let us know. So the idea for us in New Brunswick, and worldwide really, is for Canada to punch well above its weight in terms of reducing world emissions. Mm-hmm. We can talk about our 1.8% of world emissions, and we can cause everybody in every household across this country to spend more and have less and do less. Or we can say we've always been a nation that's rich in energy. It has given us the lifestyle we have, but it's also given us the ability to help others. So isn't it sad, when I was in Europe a few years ago, spring, talking to different people, it was after the invasion in Ukraine, and they're saying all through this, we're absolutely shocked that a country as rich as Canada is not supplying any energy to Europe to offset Russian oil and gas. Absolutely shocked. So when you think about that for a minute, we've spent how many millions or billions to help Ukraine? So on the one hand, we supply arms and to the war, which we're not begrudging. We wanted to do that. But then on the other hand, we're forcing them to buy Russian oil and gas and finance from the other side. So then you look at what can we do about that in addition to supplying what we have here. On the world emission side, we in New Brunswick, we have 77 trillion standard cubic feet of natural gas sitting, waiting to be developed. Out west, this is happening. We have an LNG plant that is waiting to be converted to an export facility. It is an import built back 15 years ago. So we have supply, we have market. We have 4 countries, right without even asking, saying we'll sign up for a 20-year deal. We have 174 coal plants in Europe. We have China building coal plants at the rate of 2 a week, 100 a year. They operate 1,100 coal plants. For every coal plant that's shut down by natural gas, we reduce emissions by 50%. So you say, wow, we have an opportunity right here in New Brunswick to shut down coal plants. Total Energy, one of the world's largest energy companies, said one of their key pillars, of their 4 pillars, is to develop as much natural gas worldwide as they can and shut down as many coal plants as they can, because it'll have a bigger impact, quicker impact than anything else that is happening. And at the same time, the affordability issue in our country goes away or diminishes greatly, because we'll use those same resources to fund technology, research, development. And when do people start using and acting differently? I think years ago about the film industry, when digital photography came along, where would you find a film camera now? And the same thing with LED lights. Well, now you just look for LED lights because of their brightness and their energy consumption. When we have the ability to have that sort of technological advancement, people will change their habits. We'll be able to meet the requirements, which we cannot meet today from the federal policies. We are putting forward a policy and I actually have it, coincidentally, here with me, but, and it's called No Tax Required. Just support us developing gas and shutting down coal plants in the process. And I'm submitting that letter to the Prime Minister and saying, here's an option. You wanted a solution? Here it is. But think out of the box. Think bigger. Think of the impact that this country can have on worldwide emissions, not in our own little bubble of 1.8%.
I must say, I've been quite surprised that Justin Trudeau keeps inviting European heads of government and state here, because every time they come, they all do an interview with, Vashi Kapelos or something and say, oh, I'd love to buy LNG, and then Justin Trudeau has to come out and say, there's no business case. But it is quite, it's a joke, but a lot of the government's a joke, but there's a particular absurdity to this, in that you have people literally lining up to buy something. You have industry lining up to sell something. And to appropriate the language of one of our next speakers, the gatekeeper is the federal government. And that we're not even looking for an issue here. It's not an issue where someone is looking for a subsidy. They're looking for permission.
Exactly right.
And that's the sole absurdity here. It's actually quite despicable. You have industry, you have buyers, you have an economic argument for it, you have an environmental argument for it, and a federal government standing in the way. And as a premier, do you feel like this is just bad policy, or do you feel this is illegal policy? This is government actually violating its constitutional requirements to respect what's supposed to be your domain?
All the above. And it's not the only one, right? And there's, it's kind of, we're getting used to the bad policy phenomena from Ottawa. The concept, I think, of this is, for us, is that we don't need federal money, to your point. It's a business case. Out west, they didn't need federal money. It was bad law that caused them to have to buy a pipeline, and that was, 4 or 5 times more in expense to taxpayers? We don't want them to have any part of this. We always said, just leave us alone. But you can't put rules in place that say if you don't have a plant up and running by 2030 or whatever the number, 2028, then it can't run for more than 5 years, or it has to be shut down. Like there's a new clause in that basically developers are saying, no, I need a 20-year runway here. So you can't do that. So policy is causing a problem. And then the reality, people are starting now with the affordability issue all of a sudden. Wow, this is starting to bite. And your point about the break on the, it said, well, polls trump climate change, didn't it? Really, that's what it said. The big message is that, if you can do it in the Eastern Canada, why can't we do it elsewhere? But I think the bigger message is, why can't we do something better? And that is the challenge. And the Prime Minister is in this ideological frame of mind that better just doesn't register. And so I keep pushing that give us the ability and be part of the solution to help promote the right legislation. But also, then that gives the First Nations more of an understanding of, okay, I can be part of this now. Because obviously, to do a development like we want to do in New Brunswick, we need First Nations to be part of that. And they will be major beneficiaries of that. And so I'm excited about that. And we're working through that with them, but again, it requires policy that says it's okay.
So what relationship would you like to see? Because, and I'm going to be speaking with Premier Smith tomorrow, and I think Alberta has generally, as a matter of survival, had to be a lot more forceful against Ottawa for much of the last several decades. But when you look at that relationship that you would like to see, the one that you have now, the one that possibly Pierre Poilievre, assuming he's elected, would be able to provide you as a premier, and assuming you win your re-election, what should that look like?
Well, I've always been a strong federalist for a good reason. Not only the national pride of our nation, but also because, and I also believe in that Alberta and Saskatchewan, but Alberta particularly has been paying the bills for a long time in this nation. I think they would agree as well. Yeah, and I know several years ago, as a a maritimer that you all know, we were a recipient of transfer funds at about 30% of our budget. But I'm not proud of that. I'm honored to be part of it because it makes the lifestyle in our province equitable with other parts of the country. But this project that I'm talking about to develop, I've always said, and I've said it for many years and nationally and when I'm in the meetings with my colleagues, I don't believe that we should be in a position not developing resources that we have, which are the very ones that we're relying on from Alberta to pay the bills. I just don't think that's fair.
Yeah. I actually think they moved Danielle Smith to tomorrow because they were worried if you were here the same day, she would ask for the money back. I think that might have been the risk there. But as we talk about the road forward, I know you and Premier Smith have actually had quite a good relationship, and for a lot of reasons, you've had a common foe in the federal government in Ottawa. I wanted to ask about a policy that you're championing in New Brunswick that is coming up that I know Alberta has done as well, and is also one of these issues that I think is becoming one where there's a fair bit of national momentum. And I don't know how much is public, so I think you know what I'm talking about, though, so I'll just give you the floor on this.
Well, and it's our compassionate care intervention bill that we plan to bring forward in the legislature in May. And it is a tough one because we've had some very significant incidents on the homeless side in our province over the last 2 months. We've had homeless individuals that have lost and had to amputate their legs because they've frozen. We've had 2 deaths here recently, back about maybe two or 3 weeks ago, that basically were tent fires and people trying to keep warm. And I called the daughter of one of the victims that died in the fire, and about a week after or less. And I knew that he would certainly be upset for good reason. But of course, it's all kind of, things we could do better as government, and I don't deny any of that, because we shouldn't have the situation. But I'd made a statement about how do we convince people to come off the street when you know they are not capable of making the decision on their own. You know their life's at risk. And how do you find a path to say, wow, safety has got to play a role here? And of course, the question is, well, we can't do that. If they don't want to come, they don't want to come. So where does our humanity kick in? And you say, I know that individual won't be alive in the morning. So what we're trying to say, there are extreme cases that we can analyze and find a solution so a person does not suffer the life-changing issues that they suffer from being exposed to the elements. And then, of course, it's the whole concept about how do we find a path out of drugs and addiction. I am not a supporter of continued drug being on a program that continues to keep a person addicted to drugs. I believe in recovery.
You obviously could not be geographically further from British Columbia. I would argue politically further from British Columbia, too. But do you look at British Columbia and see a very useful model for everything to do the opposite of?
You know, it's funny you say that, because that's exactly what I was going to say. They have been a perfect example of what not to do. And so why do we pretend otherwise? And I had just this week met with several people that are serving the homeless in the Fredericton area, and we talked about some of the challenges. But for me, it's like, hey, how do people get here, and how do we find a way that we can find them out? How do we find a way to help them return to a normal life? And what is normal could be very different for different people. But the interesting part came back to, well, if someone doesn't want to go, they can't give them help. And I asked the question because we're looking at a mental health and addiction treatment center, because along with addiction, the mental health plays a big role. And we're working to develop that, and we have a building and such. But the point that they were raising, well, if someone wants to go to be treated, they've got to have a place to go immediately. As soon as they say, okay, I'm ready, they got to have a place to go. So I said, okay, so that's Friday night. What if they say Saturday night or Sunday night or Monday morning? No, I don't think this is for me. I don't think I want to stay here. What do you do then? Well, you have to let them go. Well, I said, how many cycles do you get into for that? Because you just keep going round and around and around. So it isn't one of those tough discussions. But we know homeless situations are increasing. We know New Brunswick affordability's played a role. We've had an increase in population like we haven't seen for 100 years. And property values have gone up. Nothing like we'd have here in Ontario, mind you, just for anyone who wants to move to New Brunswick. But the idea is that it's a case where people generally have seen a step change in their ability to afford where they were. So we need to not lose sight of them and have them be exposed to the situation that we don't want them to live and become accustomed to. And so we have to react quicker. We have all kinds of social assistance caseworkers. And when I said, asked the question, okay, so what relationship do our caseworkers have with the individuals on the street? How often do you see them? And one of the answers I got, well, monthly. Monthly. Yeah, when I'm handing out the check. That's not servicing the needs of the people with the people we have in the system.
I would like it noted he ended as the timer hit 5 seconds. You would have a great career in radio, Premier, if the next election doesn't work out well. You'd get out in time for news and traffic. Well, Premier Blaine Higgs, you have put New Brunswick Conservatives on the map for a lot of people across the country, and I know it's been a pleasure, I suspect, for everyone in the room. It has certainly been a pleasure for me, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.